wanted to cure a disease. That was my stated goal.
That particular piece that you're working on.
We have one project in the lab. We're working on an anti-cancer antibody, so it targets the immune system.
Could there be another pandemic?
Yeah, it is a matter of time. Now, how much time, nobody knows, right? So that's the thing.
There's this apprehension towards vaccinations, and people may be sort of like, hey, I'm not going that route.
In my world, in the blood banking world, there are pushes in some states to have a blood supply of people who've never been vaccinated. So is that justified by the science? So we did some studies. If you got a transfusion from someone who had been vaccinated, did you do worse than if you got a transfusion from someone who hadn't been vaccinated?
Phillip Norris, Dr. Phillip Norris, one of my favorite people in the entire world. Such an honor to have you in here today. Thank you for coming to spend some time with us.
Jock, thank you so much for having me. I can't imagine why you invited me, but I'm glad to be here.
You know, one of the things I always find with people who are peak performers is incredible amount of humility. And as we get into your story, we're going to find out just how much of a peak performer you truly are. Hey, one of the things, as you know, in the show, all of the proceeds, the profit from the show goes to a charity. You're working on some very important work, and I'd like to know what your charity is.
Well, so I think, I work for Vitalant, which is the second biggest blood bank in the country. We're not for profit. And we have a foundation arm, Vitalant Foundation. And that supports research. We're going to talk a little about the research that I'm doing that I think really would benefit from this. So if people are moved, as you hear the podcast, I would love to have them donate to the Vitalant Foundation.
Yeah, and they, just because we're taking money from the views doesn't mean that we can't and put a link in where anyone can go find out about that work and donate money to it. Anyone that's been affected by cancer or other things, had a loved one that had a problem, might want to go ahead and actually donate there. And I think a great opportunity.
Well, thanks for bringing that up. I really appreciate that because, as you know, we're all scrambling.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough time.
It is a tough time.
Yeah,
but we keep doing what we do.
Yeah, well, that's why it's such an honor to have you here. So let's get into it.
Okay.
How was rounding at SF General recently?
Yeah, so that was just last week. It's challenging. So it's an amazing experience. As you know, I don't do a lot of doctoring, so I trained as a physician. Most of the time I run a research lab now. So I'll do 2 to 4 weeks in the hospital a year. So staying up is difficult. But when I'm in there, gosh, do I love it. It just takes me right back. And I work with a really strong team of fellows and residents and pharmacists and everybody. Something about being a doctor, you get to see inside people's lives and be a part of that and hopefully interact with that for the better.
Yeah. Well, based on some of the cases that you've seen or that you've shared with me, it's an interesting experience.
Well, right. So San Francisco General is the county hospital. So there are primarily to serve people, A, who have trauma. So it's the trauma center for the city, but B, really people who don't have insurance and fall through the cracks otherwise. So immigrants or a lot of IV drug abuse and addicts. So seeing the toll that takes is tough, but we try to help them through that process.
As an infectious disease specialist, do you see like the IV drug use? Like, remember the movie Requiem for a Dream, where the guy winds up losing an arm? There's this stuff. We were walking by our office in the city, and then we walked past some guy, and his arm was just cellulitis, just completely swollen up. And I guess they're using some other stuff that they're shooting with fentanyl or something like that, and causing major infections. And
yeah, there are some additives that cause big ulcers on the arms. I think that's off the street now, but we went through a phase of that, and so it's really tough.
Yeah.
And these are people, once you get to know them, drug abuse doesn't discriminate. There are people from our neighborhoods and there are people from all over the country. It's tough.
Yeah. I mean, it's like anybody. I remember, I don't know, a couple of orthopedic surgeries ago, I have a resistance to, or have a allergic reaction to pain medicine, makes my skin itch. So they have to find this, and I want to bundle it. And so my skin wouldn't itch. Was the only thing that worked. And I got to tell you, I was like, I got to get off this stuff. I gotta get off of it as fast as I can. When I came off of that for like an entire week, I felt like everything's perfect. Everything's going great. The entire world is going to end. So you could see how that could happen to just
Oh,
like
yeah.
anybody, right?
Well, so it's interesting, these opioid pain relievers. So we have opioid receptors on our nerves. And when we get a high level of opioids in our bloodstream, the receptors will actually downregulate because they're adjusting to how much is in the environment. So then if you take away that outside opioid, stop taking it, we have our endogenous opioids we make. So the runner's high, you go for a run, you feel great afterwards. Well, that's your own endorphins that are in your body. But that's not enough because the receptors have all been downregulated. So to get back to normal, you still need a little bit from the outside because we've dialed back our receptors. So for that to recover is really difficult. And that's why a lot of people end up on methadone or buprenorphine or a drug like that, just to take away that terrible feeling. So you start off feeling normal, you take the opioids, you feel great. Then when they wear off, you feel bad. But then when you don't have them, you feel worse than you would have if you'd never had them in the first place.
Yeah. I threw my back out in the gym recently and they gave me tramadol. And when I came off of tramadol, when I was like, stop taking that, like my skin hurt. Interesting. Just like it's not I don't know. I think it's a synthetic opioid or something like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I was hospitalized. I could not move. I had to go to the
Right.
actual hospital by ambulance because I couldn't actually get out of the car.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah, it was so bad. Yeah. So, okay. Here we are.
No pain meds.
No pain meds today.
Yeah.
Unless you brought some. Just kidding.
Did not.
Okay. All right. So let's go back. Origin story, pathway to peak performance. You are definitely a peak performer. I mean, the reality is you have a pretty interesting story. So let's go back, take it all the way back to childhood.
Okay.
It's about, growing up, your choices and how you eventually became a doctor and working at the company that you work at, as well as, all the other things that you do.
Sure. Well, obviously starts with family. So my parents were both on green cards. They didn't get their citizenship here until they were in their 70s. So my mom is British and my dad's Canadian. They met when they were in graduate school in London. They were at London School of Economics. And then one of my dad's friends from undergraduate, he had gone to school in the States, at Hobart. And so his friend sponsored him for a green card here. And they moved to Sacramento. They up and moved. They'd been living in Winnipeg after they got married. And they moved here. And so growing up, I had a suburban Sacramento life. I don't know if you ever saw the show 8 is Enough, but it was kind of like that. I had one sister, not a whole bunch. But Sacramento is a great place. It's stable. It was a nice place. It wasn't maybe the most exciting place, but I think that's fine for kids. I had a wonderful upbringing. My parents were divorced when I was young. I was 6, so that was really tough. And I think that was one of the things that started to form me. We had to move a number of times when I was 6 and then 8. And so I moved a number of times. Mom remarried. And I have a great stepfather, still really close. That made me be able to make friends, though. I think I was always being pushed out of my comfort zone as a young kid. One of the things that I always had, you're a kid and you have to meet new people, and that's really hard. I think it's hard. You don't know yourself as a kid. You don't know your own value. I was skinny, probably a little late to mature physically. Wasn't really until I was in high school that I would call myself a decent athlete. But I worked at it. But I always had intelligence. So wherever I was blessed with that. And I was always the smartest kid at school. So that was sort of part of me. That became part of me. And academics were important in our household. It was
I would imagine.
expected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, London School of Economics,
You know, It was a great place. It was really neat. My dad always said, I was just a few years ahead of Mick Jagger because he went there too. So he was really proud of that. Yeah. So my mom's side of the family is British, so we'd go over there in the summers to see my grandparents. It was obviously fairly foreign coming from Sacramento, which was not the fast lane at all. Then going back to see England was really a neat perspective. But then getting back to the academics, so that was a big part of what I wanted to do. It was just expected that we would go to university. It wasn't a burden at all. It was always, you're going to love this. Really fun time. And boy, is it. I don't know if you remember your university days. I remember mine.
Yeah, you wound up at Cal, right?
I did. I did. So,
Which in the 80s must have been a lot of fun.
it was so much fun, and it was a different time. I see our kids applying to school these days, and they've all sort of done their journey or they're in their journeys. But when I applied to 3 schools, Cal, Stanford, and Caltech, and got into 2, didn't get into 1. But in a totally different time now, right? Cal was my safety school. Nobody says that anymore.
Yeah, and like you'd be so lucky to get into Cal now. It's like you'd have to have all AP classes and like 2 or 3 extracurricular and then community service on top of it, I think, it's like,
Yeah.
it's insane.
It's a different world for these kids. So I do feel for them. It's the goalposts have shifted, but it's the world they live in. I think there are more kids in the same number of schools. That's part of it. It's tough for our kids. I feel for them.
Yeah. So at Cal, what's your undergrad? What do you study?
So I went in, I knew that I was probably peaking in high school, which was probably true. So I went into engineering, and I couldn't really decide what kind of engineering. So there was this new field called bioengineering, and it was a major. It was one of maybe the first class of bioengineers or second. I graduated in 1989. But at that point, you had to sort of do a potpourri of engineering. So I did chemical and electrical and mechanical. I did all those, emphasized in chemical engineering. And then I also decided it couldn't get through in 4 years. I had too many requirements for this new major, and it wasn't all that well organized. So I then decided I had to do another semester. So I got a second degree in molecular biology. As long as I was going to stay, I'd get another one. And molecular biology is all about manipulating DNA and engineering cells, and that's really cool. And it's, today I don't know how many biotechs founded on the backs of molecular biology. So I was really fortunate. And then I had to decide, what am I going to do with my life next? You asked, why did I become a doctor? And I was working as an engineer. I worked in the electronics industry. When you make a microchip, that power our computers, what they do is they have a silicone wafer. So they take a big cylinder of silicone and slice little pieces off and make wafers. And then on top of that, they'll put a layer of metal. And then they'll put what's called this photoresist compound, where they basically have a pattern that they put on. And that pattern is where the wires will be, and it protects the wires as you then etch away everything that's not covered by the pattern. And that'll leave you with a pattern of these very small wires on this silicone chip. And they do that in multiple layers to make a microchip. And so I was working for this lab this company that use plasma etchers. And how they etch these chips is they take a gas in a little chamber, and they use megahertz voltage, which is very high energy voltage, to make a plasma, which is what the sun is. So it's not hot, it's neutral temperature, but basically they blast so much electricity into this gas that it will make the electrons and the positive ions fly apart from each other. And so say you have a chlorine gas in there, you suddenly have your chlorine ion that you can then use another electrode to accelerate down into the chip, and that basically bombards the chip, and the protected areas don't get eaten and the unprotected areas do. That's how they make a microchip. So I was doing that, and we were getting to the point where we were trying to get down to 1 micron of very small little wires. And I looked around, I said, this is going to happen with or without me. I was an engineer at this company. I said, I want to cure a disease. My stepdad was a doctor. My second stepdad was a physician and was encouraging me to do this. My boss in the lab where I was working said, oh, doctors are just glorified mechanics. Don't do it. So I had these two opposing viewpoints, but I got to go on rounds with my second stepfather, and go in the hospital and see. We go read X-rays, go see patients, and it clearly wasn't just being a mechanic. You had to know the body, but there was more to it. So I think that was what made me interested enough. I knew I wanted to do research, so I talked to my Berkeley professors, and they said, well, if you're interested in medical research, you'll probably be better off with an MD than just the straight PhD. And I think there are real success stories of people who just have an MD in research, in medical research, and just a PhD or both. A lot of people have both. I only got one.
Well, it wasn't you made it sound like you couldn't get it if you want, like, the reality is you could have gotten it if you wanted it. You could have gone that route probably if you wanted to do that, but there must have been some sort of faster path or thought process around that. What was that decision making like?
Yeah, great question. So the U.S., how it's different in the U.S. from say Canada, how the MD PhD programs work. So how they work in the U.S. is you do 2 years of medical school, then you do your PhD, then you come back and do your last 2 years of medical school. And if you do that, they'll pay for your medical school. So you get the bonus of not paying for that expensive medical school. But people who do that, they lose their classmates because they go off in the lab when their classmates are going into the hospital. So that's part of the lose your comrades. But then also you do your PhD, then you go back into the hospital. And by the time you get back to a research lab, your research can be a little stale. So you lose a little momentum. So another way to do it is to do the MD and then do all the clinical training and then just go into a lab as a fellow, which I did. And I sort of treated it like my own little PhD. But the danger of that is you get thrown into the lab and you have about 2 years to make it. And if you don't get papers and grants, you're out. And that's fine. 98% of MDs actually do medicine, which is what they should do. And about 2% go into the research route. So it's a little higher risk route. It seems to have worked so far.
Incredible. So you wind up at UCSF and you're working with some pretty interesting guys. Weren't you doing like a co-sponsored thing with Michael Mathey, Dr. Mathey at one point in time or something?
Yeah, so we've collaborated on a few projects, and we haven't directly written a grant together, but we've been on some of the same papers because we each brought our own skill set to these manuscripts. And I want to go back to the journey a little bit because we talk about, I went to medical school, I did engineering, then went to medical school. It wasn't quite as straight as that. The path wasn't like that. So I'll give talks to the high school kids on career day about, this is where I went to school, and it was Berkeley, Columbia, Duke, and Harvard. Looks great, right? Little logos up there. I never got my first choice. Medical school, I didn't get in the first time. I had a lost year, which was fantastic. So
I want to know where you worked. I want to know what you did.
Yeah. So I had a year and a half between I graduated in December because I had that extra half year. So that first 6 months I I worked as an engineer. Then I resigned, because I thought I'd be going to medical school, in the fall. And so I went and traveled Europe for a few months, post college, which was fantastic. Just had a backpack and hiked around, went all through Eastern Europe right after the wall fell. So neat.
Wow.
You'd go, nobody spoke much English. There were no hotels because there was no tourism.
Yeah.
So you would show up in the train station and families would be there waiting to greet you, and you could rent a room in their house. So I went to Yugoslavia, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, went back when it was Czechoslovakia still. And it was incredible. Really neat experience. And just seeing a society that was, getting their first taste of freedom. It was really neat.
Yeah, to think about the emergence of like those people were so repressed, so fearful of the Soviet Union that it must have been like you're walking into like, I don't even know how to describe it. It must have been incredible.
It was incredible. So I remember in Ljubljana, Yugoslavia, we went and stayed. My friend went with me. So I had two of us went backpacking through there because it was so new that we didn't really want to go alone. So we went and we stayed in a student hostel, like it was a university, I think. We're staying in their residence hall, and we're talking to some of their kids our age. And they looked at our mouths and they said, "Open your mouths." And I was, open our mouths, and neither one of us had a cavity, and they just couldn't believe it. I mean, the dental care that we had was just completely foreign. It made us appreciate how we had grown up in such an I wouldn't say even affluent, but just the standard of living was so much higher.
Oh yeah, I would imagine it was like completely
Yeah.
different.
So anyway, to get back, so that was the first 6 months of my lost year and a half. And then I came back and lived with some of my buddies from Cal who were still in school, and I was a really bad influence because I was not in school. Uh, I really wanted to work in a research lab because I thought it would bolster my resume a bit so I could get into medical school. And I was beginning to apply for medical school, but nobody wanted to hire me for a year because you have to train a person, and they just felt like it'd be more investment in me than they would get out of me.
Well, at least you were honest enough to tell them what you were really trying to do.
Yeah, say they all wanted a 2-year commitment. I said, no, I want to go.
Yeah, instead of like leaving them high and dry.
Yeah. I've had that happen to me as an employer since, and
And that's not
it's tough. It's not fun.
Yeah.
So I did have integrity, I guess. So I was living with these friends of mine, and my parents said, "Okay, we'll pay for your med school applications, but you've got to fund yourself. You're graduated from school." So I got a credit card, and I could pay the rent on that. And I think I had these rotating credit cards, so I got up to about $5,000 in debt, and I had about 6 months yet left before I had to go to medical school. And I said, "Okay, it's time to do something different. I'm not getting a lab job." And I used to paint houses. So my dad was a landlord. And as a kid in high school, my summer job was to work on the houses, whatever needed doing, shoveling dirt, putting roofs on, painting. I did a lot of painting. So I got pretty good at it. And so I ended up painting this guy's house. He designed the Mirage Casino. He lived up in the hills, Bud Compersano, great guy.
Wow.
And he had this spectacular house up in the hills at Lafayette. It was in Lafayette. He was doing all sorts of faux finishing. So there was an artist who was working there. So the artist taught me how to do crackle painting, where you paint glue on the paint and then paint on top of that, and it crackles, makes it look antique. And I sanded these columns, put stir sand in the paint, and then paint those to make them look old. And then I would take sponges, sea sponges, and pounce the paint on to give it sort of you use a brown on the white, and you make it look all old. All this brand new stuff. So that was my job for 6 months, and I was able to pay off the credit cards, and it all worked out.
Wow.
Yeah,
How interesting
really fun.
to learn that.
Yeah, it was really fun. And my dad made me come home and do his bathroom with the bouncing. He's like, "Well, you know how to do this now."
I was going to say, hey, on Saturday, if you just come by the house, that'd be pretty.
Anytime. I might be a little rusty. Yeah, I only paint my own house now.
The good news is when you're asking for something for free from a friend, you can't be too upset if it doesn't come out perfect, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So you do this, and what happens next?
Well, so then I went to medical school, right? And I thought, okay, I had a lot of fun as an undergrad. I really did, probably too much, which is why I didn't get into medical school the first time. And I thought, okay, this is going to be serious. I'm going to New York City, and they're all going to be nerds. And turns out I was wrong. Had a great time. Met really good friends there, still lifelong friends. And medical school was different. I'd gone to Berkeley, which is big, as you know. 20,000 undergrads at the time. I think there are more now. And the medical school class was 154 people. Very different experience. And we all lived in a residence hall together the first year. Most of us did. And we really got to know each other. It was like going to a small little high school almost.
Yeah.
So made these lifelong lasting relationships and such powerful experiences all the way through medical school. The first years you have to dissect a body is the first thing they make you do. And you learn a ton, but also appreciate the gift that these people have given of their bodies for us to learn.
Yeah, that is a huge thing, right? I mean, if you've ever been in the cadaver lab, it's sort of like the notion of, I remember the first time I was like, it kind of hit me. It's like, where do these bodies? Oh, yeah, that's right. People donate their body to science.
Yeah.
Pretty wild.
What a gift.
Yeah.
Yeah. So learned a lot there. And then as time went on, we got to interact with patients. Medical education now, they get the students in the hospital much faster, or interacting with patients much faster. But in the old days when I did it, it was pretty much 2 years of didactic book work and then 2 years full-time in the hospital, rotating through the various specialties to figure out what you want to do.
Yeah, and in those days too, I mean, you're just getting pounded. I mean, you got crazy hours and just always on call, right? I mean, is that sort of what's happening for you at that stage?
Yeah, so medical school, you're on rotations and you do start to get the sleepless nights. I remember on the medicine rotation, we had to present from memory. So we had not only we did have to know the patient, write the notes, but we had to present everything from memory. Couldn't use any notes. This was the old days. They don't do that anymore. But I think it made me a better doctor being able to present from memory because it makes you remember what's important. But then after the medical school is the internship and residency years. Internship is just the first year of residency.
Yeah.
And I did internal medicine. And I did my first year at Columbia because, again, I didn't get into Duke the first time. And then I transferred to Duke. I had a girlfriend down there. And I remember at Duke, my second year was definitely the hardest. There was a 6-month block where I had 1 day off. And I almost went to the hospital because I had nowhere to go. I didn't know what to do with myself. I said, Phillip, you can't do this. This is Stockholm syndrome. But it was tough. So we had, when we were in the intensive care units, it was every other night call. So that meant that we worked 26 hours, then you had 22 hours off, and then you worked 26. And it went on for 2 months. Just bang, bang, bang. And you know what they said? The only thing wrong with every other night call? You miss half the good cases. They call them the Duke Marines, and we did work hard. But we were good. We got a lot of responsibility given to us. So it was a really good experience. Learned a lot. Drew on that the rest of my life of being a doctor. How many patients I saw during that period.
Wow. Must have been intense.
It was intense. But then we got to the last year of residency, and you had an option to go do 3 months somewhere else. So I went to Brazil. We had a program with this hospital in Vitória, Brazil, which is up the coast from Rio.
Now, out of curiosity, did you speak Portuguese? I mean, what the Brazil experience must have been really intense. I mean,
really intense. It was great. So I knew I wanted to do infectious diseases at that point, and it's a chance to see tropical medicine. It was amazing. So no, I didn't speak. I took high school French, took 3 years of high school French. And when I was an intern in New York, I taught myself Spanish just reading a book on the subway to and from work because I was either call a translator for every Spanish-speaking patient, there were a lot, or just learn it. So I learned enough that I could communicate. So then when it came time to go down there, they gave us these Berlitz language tapes we'd put on our ears and listen. So the first, and these were all young, mostly single residents. The first sentence we learned was, "Sou solteiro e casada," which means, I'm single. Are you married? So we'd all walk around the hospital at Duke saying this to each other. "Sou solteiro e casada." And I've since learned from the Brazilians that the first sentence they learn in English, because they all take English, is, "The book is on the table." So I don't know why we learned such a racy beginning, but
yeah.
it was really fun. And I actually did, because I had this protected time, I was able to learn a fair bit of Portuguese. I had a patient this last week from Brazil who was newly diagnosed with HIV, and we were able to talk in Portuguese. It was really fun.
Yeah. I think that if you learn Spanish, you're in New York City and, you're saying cerveza. Now you've got to learn how to say cerveja, right?
Nice. Cerveja bem gelada. That's how the Brazilians drink it. Ice cold. They like it so cold.
Yeah. You never want to miss out on the cachaça, right?
Oh, yeah.
Caipirinhas.
Oh,
Holy smokes.
Oh, you've been there, I guess, huh?
Well, here's the funny thing. I have not. But my brother went there to visit some family friends, and he came back I think he was maybe 15 years old, and I don't know how he pulled this off, but he brought back a bottle of that.
Of the cachaça.
Yeah.
Oh, so
that was
good.
the first experience that we ever had with that. And let me just say it was a good one.
Yeah. Isn't it great? Yeah. I remember my first day I got there, we went down to the beach. There were 2 of us sent down together. So another resident and I went down to the beach our first day, got some caipirinhas, looked out at the water, and we said, "Oh my gosh, can you believe we're here?"
Yeah.
So neat. And what was great about, from a medical standpoint, We went all over the country, actually. Our professor took us with him to conferences. So we got to see the up in the Amazon and really remote places and see new diseases. And one day I saw 3 diseases I'd never seen before. I think I was in Rio that day. It was leprosy, measles, and someone with tetanus, and they had lockjaw, and they were on the ventilator because they couldn't breathe. They were paralyzed, and you basically have to wait for the toxin to wear off. So these people can be on ventilators for a month until the toxin gets out of the body.
Are they conscious during this period of time?
Well, they get sedated.
Yeah.
So they would be if they weren't, but you give medicine. If someone's on the ventilator, you usually need to give some sedatives so they don't fight the ventilator. It's very rare for somebody to be able to tolerate having a breathing tube on and having the.
Yeah. I mean, to be intubated and conscious must be like,
Yeah.
whoa, that's
I had one woman, and this inspires me. If I ever have to go on the ventilator, I want to be like her. She let the machine do its work and stayed conscious, so she wasn't zonked out. And so she was still able to write messages and communicate. But that is very rare for someone to be able to tolerate that tube without having to get knocked out.
Yeah, that's heavy duty stuff.
It is.
The leprosy case, what was that like?
Well, they have a fair bit of it there. They call it Hansen's disease now because of the stigma attached to leprosy. But, we all know leprosy from biblical times, right? So there are it's a really interesting bug. So it's a cousin of tuberculosis. They're both mycobacteria because they have these mycophenolic acids in their cell walls.
I never knew that. That's so interesting.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're both kind of slow-growing bacteria. They're mycobacteria, but they're both slow-growing. So tuberculosis typically goes into the lungs, and there's an acute infection, and then usually it goes dormant and stays in the lungs. And then later in life, it can reactivate, or if people get immune suppressed, it can reactivate. So it can do other things, like there's a disease called scrofula, which is tuberculosis in the lymph nodes of the neck. So it has it can infect the spine and cause problems there. But that's tuberculosis. So its cousin leprosy is also a slow-growing bug, and it has different forms. So there's lepromatous leprosy, or we call multibacillary. I'm getting a little technical, but there are a lot of these tubercles in the skin. And there's not as much of an immune response. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where the immune system really attacks it, and there aren't that many of these leprosy bugs in there, but you get a lot of damage to the nerves from the inflammation. Manifestations are nerve damage. You can see little patches of numb skin, or the nerves to the digits get damaged, and then
So you have neuropathy and just can't feel stuff anymore.
Can't feel stuff, so then you get damaged. So that's why you think of the lepers with their body parts falling off.
Yeah.
It's because they don't feel, so they get damaged, don't know it, and then you get little infections or infarcts and skin's damaged.
It's almost like the same thing you get with diabetic wounds, right?
Yes, exactly.
So hyperbaric oxygen therapy used in treatment of that with leprosy, is that something that was available at that time?
No, and it's a little different. So hyperbaric oxygen is delivering oxygen to the tissues, right? And in diabetes, it's really a disease of the small blood vessels, right?
Yep.
So that high blood sugar damages the little blood vessels. So if you have, say, a diabetic foot infection, there's usually not good circulation there, which is what allows the bugs to grow because our white blood cells can't get in there and there's not enough oxygen. So that's how hyperbaric oxygen therapy is supposed to help a diabetic foot, but that's not the same thing that happens in leprosy.
Got it. So with that, where hyperbaric oxygen therapy, you're pushing oxygen compressed to that hypoxic tissue and getting oxygen in there where it couldn't get otherwise. In this particular instance, that's not effective. So tell me more about this. This is fascinating.
The leprosy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was so interesting. In fact, when I came back from Brazil, I had to give a presentation at Duke about what did you learn. And this was before we really had much in the way of computers, and we had computers. But so I still have the little old slides. Remember, you'd have a photo in a frame, and I still have those slides. So I gave a talk on leprosy, just the history through biblical times and our own U.S. I think the history of leprosy in the U.S. is really interesting. The leprosaria the places where we put the lepers. Carville was a big one in Louisiana. And it shut down, gosh, this was in the 90s. So it must have shut down in the late 70s. So up until that time, we still had people living in segregated from society, which is incredible.
Yeah, I remember Molokai in Hawaii,
Yeah.
right? Flying over from, in those days, you couldn't just fly to Maui.
Right.
You had to fly from
Oahu.
and you'd fly over Molokai, basically, and there's leper colony down there.
Wow.
Yeah, wild, right?
Yeah. So we have it here in the U.S. Armadillos will carry it. Those cute little armadillos, they can carry leprosy.
So don't snuggle with armadillos.
Do not snuggle with an armadillo. Don't sleep with them. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a disease that, like tuberculosis, it's close contact. So you don't have a high burden of bugs usually. So you got to be around someone who's a leper, which is why the segregation worked through Middle Ages to now. I mean, it's not a very easy disease to pass on. And now we have drugs. So it doesn't mean the same thing it did back in the old days when it couldn't be cured. Now we have cures for it.
So is it like some sort of high power antibiotic that you're using for that, or what is it?
Yeah, there's a combination of antibiotics that are used. And some of them, like clofazimine, turns the skin red. So there's some stigma attached to that, because if you see someone who has this characteristic sort of ruddy complexion in an area where leprosy is active, you know that they're taking the medicines for that, and it can be a permanent skin. But we can cure it. So that's the important thing.
So, all right. So you get tetanus, leprosy, and what was the other one?
Yeah. I think it was measles.
Measles?
I had not seen, well, now we have measles all over the place, right? Because we don't vaccinate people. But back then we had very high vaccination rates in the US, and we very rarely saw a measles case. And they still had trouble getting everybody vaccinated up there or down there in Brazil.
I remember getting vaccinated as a kid for measles, I think.
MMR. Yeah. Everybody does this.
Well, what was the thing that was the little scar?
Oh, yeah. Now that's very interesting. So that was smallpox.
Oh, yeah.
So smallpox has been eradicated, right? So it lives in the freezers in some US labs and some Russian labs. That's it. Unless there's some hanging out in a lab we haven't identified. But as far as we know, those are the only two stocks of smallpox that are left in the world. And that was a real triumph of vaccination. I think it was in the early 70s that the last cases, what they would do is they'd find a case in, say, Nigeria, and they would then do ring vaccinations. They'd vaccinate everybody around that contact of the case, and then all their contacts, and maybe all their contacts. And that strategy was able to wipe out the last cases that were in humans. Really exciting.
A true epidemiological exercise, right? I mean, that's
really is epidemiology applied.
Yeah.
So there's a side effect. Getting the smallpox vaccine, some people would have these really bad side effects, like it could spread from there. And very rarely someone would die from a smallpox vaccine. So it wasn't an easy vaccine to take, and you had to actually scarify the skin. You would actually take this little tool and make holes in the skin and put the smallpox in there, the smallpox vaccine, and then it would give you lifelong immunity to the real smallpox.
Same thing with polio. I remember taking a polio, I think it was like a liquid.
Okay.
Polio vaccine. Was that a liquid?
Well, they had two. They have the oral polio, and then they have the inactivated polio that you inject in the skin. I had that. So, I want to just one last thing on smallpox, then we're going to get to polio, because that's really interesting too. So the smallpox, you have it, I have it. My little sister, who was born in 1970, doesn't have it, because that's when they stopped. So if there's the apocalypse, you and I are going to be fine, but all those kids born after that, they're going to need revaccination.
Yeah, and you know what? At some point in time in the episode, we do need to talk about things in the recent past and what's the potential for other things in the future if you're willing to do that.
Oh, yeah. It's all fun.
I think as a virologist, it's really interesting to talk to you about those things.
So let's talk about polio a little bit.
Yeah.
As you touched, I had the inactivated, you had the oral. What's the difference? Why?
Yeah.
Right? So the inactivated version is a dead polio, and you just get the proteins from the virus and make an immune response against it. Boom, you vaccinate one person, you vaccinated that person. Oral is very interesting. So it's an attenuated virus. So it's actually alive, attenuated, meaning weakened, polio virus. And so the way they did it was they took a virus from a person who had polio and passaged it in cell lines for hundreds of passages. And without that selective pressure of being inside a human, it loses its ability to,
Replicate. Right?
well, not to replicate, but to invade the nervous system and to replicate to really high levels. But when you give someone a oral poliovirus vaccine, they do shed it in their stool, and then it gets into the environment and other people get vaccinated. So if you go to a village in India and give one person a polio vaccine, you're vaccinating 100 people because that virus spreads and then it ends up getting through the community.
Wow.
So really cool, except the oral polio vaccine can revert. If it mutates, it can revert to the pathogenic form. So a lot of the polio we see in the world now is actually vaccine derived because it's mutated. So we have two choices. We can go give inactivated poliovirus to everybody. That takes a lot more infrastructure than just a little sugar cube on the tongue to actually do all the injections. Or we could re-engineer that poliovirus to make it less likely to turn into the pathogenic version. And so that's what they're working on now, is making a new oral poliovirus vaccine. I just saw a lecture at UCSF last week about how they're doing that. Really interesting. So if you make the barrier to mutating higher, you put more mutations in, there are all sorts of tricks you can do to make the virus less likely to turn pathogenic. Maybe then we'll have a chance to vaccinate these areas where it's still breaking out, like in Pakistan and other areas of the world, where we still see some of this revertant polio coming out. So there's a chance for eradication. Tough problem, though. You think you've got it, and then whack-a-mole pops up over here.
Yeah, that's so crazy because I thought for a long time it was not an issue. And then all of a sudden you hear about it starting to come back and you're like, how did that happen?
Yeah, you take your thumb off and the diseases will spread.
Yeah. Well, now we know, right?
Yeah.
All right. So you're in Brazil,
Oh, yeah.
drinking caipirinhas,
Yep. Really fun.
seeing exotic diseases.
Yeah.
And you're there for 3 months.
3 months.
Did you want to leave?
Oh, I knew it was time to come back by the time. Well, so we, it actually worked out that we had 2.5 months of work and then got vacation during that period. So I had 2 weeks of vacation at the end. My dad flew down. And so he was my banker and I was his translator. It was fantastic. We traveled all over the Amazon and we went on a helicopter tour over Falls de Iguazu, arranged by me, funded by him. So it was really fun. I was just a poor resident at that time. So we had a really great time. And he actually got to participate on one of our research projects. We were doing a malaria project up on the edge of the Amazon up there, and he got to play around with that. So he had a great time. He was a businessman, so for him this was exotic.
Super cool.
Yeah, we had a really great time. So then that was over. Vacation was done, and it was time to come back and finish residency, and then go on to the next stage, fellowship.
So where do you finish residency out at Duke?
I did. So I was there for 2 years and finished internal medicine there. So that was my internal medicine training.
And so you've got an inkling that you want to be an ID guy, right?
Well, so I had to decide, and I knew I wanted to do immunology research. I always wanted to be a research scientist, and I got to do some of that with this great guy, Leonard Chess, when I was at Columbia. I rotated through his lab, and we were looking at T cell receptors, and it was pretty early immunology days. We didn't have all the techniques we have now, 30, 40 years later. So immunology interacts with a few different areas of medicine. If I were going to be a clinical practicing doctor, I liked pulmonary, which is the lungs, renal is the kidneys. That fits with the engineering side, right? You're dealing with acid-base imbalances, and cardiology was really interesting. So I really liked that. But the research I wasn't as interested in. So what really goes with immunology? So rheumatology, that's arthritis and all that sort of thing, right? Autoimmune diseases.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that was interesting research-wise, but the clinical side, it's chronic pain, and I just know my own personality. It's frustrating, right? The patients are frustrated, and I didn't want to do that. So another area that was really interesting is cancer immunology. And gosh, the Nobel Prize was awarded in 2018 for the people who figured out how to treat cancer with these immune modulatory drugs. immune checkpoint inhibitors. So I really was interested in that in terms of a research direction. But for me, I rotated through oncology and so many patients die. I mean, a lot of people die of cancer, and each one took a lick off of me. And I just knew that was going to be really tough personally. And, there are oncology doctors who get addicted to drugs, and it,
Super depressing, right?
it can be. Yeah, it takes a special person. I have such respect for the oncologists. And I knew that I probably wasn't up to that. Didn't have that in me.
How is it that you were so self-aware? I mean, that seems to me like in your pathway to peak performance, you've got this self-awareness that a lot of people just don't have. Was that just like, I mean, how are you able to like get the perspective on things and kind of know when I think so many people just don't?
Yeah, I think you can sort of bumble into things, and there's nothing wrong with that. Life presents opportunities, and you go down that pathway. There are plenty of people who are plenty successful, and more so than I, who had a good break, and they saw an opportunity and took it. So there's nothing wrong with that. I was fairly thoughtful, I think, in trying to choose the path. I had a vision of what I wanted to do. Not that I've achieved that vision yet, but I'm still working on it. And it was actually easier. So the third area that intersects with immunology a lot is infectious diseases. I mean, gosh, a lot of our genome is the way it is. A lot of the variability in our genome between us is driven by infectious diseases. So the most variable part of our genome is what's called the HLA complex, the human leukocyte antigen. And so these are the molecules that present foreign material on our cells for our immune system to surveil. And we each have a unique set of these HLA molecules. And it's diverse. There's a ton of diversity there, as I mentioned, the most diverse part. And that's because if there's a new plague that comes along, wipes out 99% of us, 1% of us are going to have that one allele that can present the antigen well and be immune to it. So that gives us the diversity of the immune system. So infectious diseases interacts with immunology at a very profound level and has shaped us as people. So when I was a medical student in New York, it was the bad days of AIDS. We had AZT basically, and there was another drug that came out, I think DDI. These drugs had a lot of side effects and not much effectiveness. So they would drop the viral load, how much virus is in the blood, by less than tenfold. And we're talking, there are millions of copies in the blood. So you're taking it from 1 million to 100,000 or 100,000 to 10,000. You don't make much headway in terms of protecting the immune system.
For going to like full-blown AIDS, right?
Exactly. So HIV infects what's called the CD4 T cell. These CD4 T cells are the quarterbacks of the immune system. So they talk to the CD8 T cells, which are the ones that go around and kill cancer cells. They kill virus-infected cells. They talk to the B cells. B cells produce the antibodies that go around and bind the virus. So these CD4 cells are really critical. And if you take them out, you still have CD8 T cells, but they aren't as effective. You still have B cells, but they don't really make antibodies the way they should. So you become more and more immune suppressed as the CD4 cells go down.
It's kind of like lopping the head off of the, I mean, it's all of a sudden you're...
Yeah, the commander's gone, so you got some troops, but they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so when I was a medical student, it was really rough. We'd have mostly gay men, some Haitian and other, but at that time, that was the main driver of the epidemic in the U.S., or the main victims of the epidemic. And they would come in and with these terrible infections, and we might be able to cure the infection or stanch the infection, but not fully cure it to get them out of the hospital. But then they'd come back and eventually would succumb to these infections and lose all their body mass. It was just terrible. People wasting away and dying, and it was horrible. And these were young people. These were people my age. I was in my late 20s by this point. And then in 1996, there was a remarkable conference in Vancouver, an AIDS conference, where David Ho presented the data, but it was developed by the drug companies, made protease inhibitors. And these protease is one of the proteins that HIV encodes. So a virus-infected cell will make this protease, and it's basically a protein that cleaves the HIV makes a long polyprotein with all of its proteins in it. And then this protease molecule chops it up into little bits that are functional. So without it, the virus is kind of stuck as a string of protein, but doesn't do anything, right? So once you chop it up into its components, then it can assemble and do all its things. So this was the first potent drug that would actually suppress the virus to levels where we couldn't detect it in the blood.
So this is where Magic Johnson has the breakthrough.
Yeah, exactly. And everybody. So they called it the Lazarus syndrome. So people had given away their car, given away their house. They had 3 months to live, skinny. All of a sudden they put on weight. They're alive. They're living. It was incredible. And that's why I went into infectious disease, because there was a ton of immunology there. It was so much hope. It was absolutely the place to be.
Must have been so exciting to be there.
Well, I wasn't in Vancouver, but yeah, no, but to be part of that environment.
Yeah, that field at that point in time where there's that much momentum towards like, hey, we're gonna really, I mean, that was just had everybody stunned and terrified, right?
Exactly. So I finished my residency in 98, mid-July of 98 or June of 98. So July of 98, I started my fellowship, and there I went up to Boston. I was at Mass General at Harvard, working with a fantastic mentor, Bruce Walker, really a giant in the field. So I, again, have been thoughtful. I read papers of all the people around the country who were doing good work and interviewed at a bunch of places. Again, I put UCSF as my first choice. I always did because I wanted to come back to California. But in those days, there's a match. So if you're going into a medical specialty, it's not that you say, oh, I want you, you want me. You rank them and they rank you. So I picked up this phone. There was a computerized voice that said, congratulations, you have matched at Massachusetts General Hospital. And I put the phone down. I said, no, that can't be. I was talking to my friends I was in the hospital, and I picked it up and they said it again. I said, okay, I guess I'm going to Boston. But it was such an amazing period.
Such a terrible choice.
I know.
I mean, to be at Harvard in those days, that was really humming, right? I mean,
it was so exciting. And I was so lucky because my mentor, who was doing really nice work, he had, I think, maybe 4 or 5 people in the lab. I think he had 4 postdocs and a couple of faculty members who were part of his universe. A really fantastic guy. And when I was there, he went supernova. He actually was on Nova, the TV show.
no kidding.
But raised a ton of money. And since then, I think he's raised, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars for AIDS research at Harvard. He's built a couple of buildings there. But when I was there, he was still a bit younger, so I had really good access and interaction with Bruce, who taught me so much about science. He had these sayings, the data are the data, meaning you may have your theory, but the data are the data.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yep. He said, always be your own worst critic. So don't get out over your skis. You've got to be critical of your own work and is this real or not, and prove it one more way. You prove it this way.
My dad always says something, never fall in love with your own immaculate conception, right?
That's beautiful. I like that.
Yeah.
And we all do that, right? Even in the hospital, I thought I had this really cool diagnosis and it turns out it was wrong. So you have to keep your mind open and see where the data take you.
Yeah. Wow. How interesting.
Oh, it was incredible. So that was 98. And I went in there and worked in the lab. And so I did a year of clinical work where it was just, 12 hours a day of seeing infectious disease patients. And that was a grind. It was hard, long days. Again, I trained before the duty hour things came in. I think they may have been in on paper, but they actually didn't get executed, which was fine. I actually think that our system, even though I was tired, I made one mistake when I was an intern. I forgot to check a potassium level in a patient. Came in the next morning. This is at Columbia. And there were these big elevators that went up and down. And I was going up the one, and I saw my medical student coming down looking perturbed, anxious. And I said, oh no. And it was Mrs. T. I won't say her name. And so I went right to her room. And of course, she was having a seizure. And the neurology resident was there and said, well, you realize that her metabolic imbalance is predisposing her to the seizure. And because I'd forgotten to check the potassium, it was after a 36-hour shift. And that was the only mistake I made, and it was fixable. So that's quantifiable, right? You see, he made a mistake. He was tired. But what we don't see is what happens now is there's a handoff When I would work a 36-hour shift, I would see the patient come in. I'd see them through the night, through the next day, and I would know, are they better or worse than when they walked in the door? Now with sign-outs, Mr. H is a little sick, keep an eye on him, but you don't know if he's sicker or not more sick. So that's the disadvantage of the current system with the sort of shift work that we do.
I admire you so greatly for actually, that's not something you had to talk about on the show, but I think that's incredible that you actually have the courage to actually say that. Many people would just not want to talk about something like that. It's admirable that you would actually, call that out and say that, and then also talk about sort of what's happening today. It's interesting. My uncle had is in the hospital today.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, had normal pressure hydrocephalus, and all of a sudden he's starting to lose his ability to move. And
Yeah.
the next thing you know, the craziest thing about it was he's they want to go in and drain it. And so the neurologist is like, oh, well, I'm going to be going out of town, so let's just go ahead and we'll wait to do the procedure. I'm like, no, no, no. This is where you need to understand how that he's not the only neurosurgeon in Miami. Let's get another, or you need to do that now.
Yeah.
He had 4 cardiac arrests in the process of this, trying to get this procedure done.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, you really have to know the healthcare system to know how to actually navigate it sometimes. I think, sorry to interrupt and tell you my own personal story about that, but I think it is interesting to think about, the notion of handoffs. And, when I was in the hospital overnight for my back, I had, I think, 2 or 3 different doctors. One came in and told me I had scoliosis. I'm like, no, no, no. I don't have scoliosis. My muscles are spasming. My lower back is tweaked.
I'm twisted.
Just get the muscles to relax, and we'll be fine. Sure enough, that's what it was. So
Yeah.
yeah. All right. So you've got the fellowship.
Yes. So I'm working. So I do the year of clinical. See a lot of patients, which I think is really important to build the knowledge base. And then after that, I went to the lab, and I would have clinic once a week, one afternoon a week. So I still stayed a little bit clinical, but really went in the lab. And this was when my chance. I remember the first day I walked in, and I was working with, so Bruce was my main mentor, and I had Eric Rosenberg was sort of the junior mentor. He was not that much older than I, but he'd done really well and got a faculty spot. So I was working with him. And I went in to talk to Eric and said, I want to go away for a week, vacation. How do I do that? What paperwork do I fill out? Who do I tell? I said, nobody. You just do it. You're self-employed now. So that really hit me. As a scientist, it's not that you're punching a clock and somebody's tracking your hours. You could work 6 hours. You could work 12. Nobody cares. What they care about is what you produce, right?
Papers, right?
Yeah. Papers are the coin of the realm. So if you don't write the papers, nobody's going to fund you. And then, of course, the real coin of the realm is grants. You have to write grants. So my first year, before I even got in the lab, that clinical year when I was working really hard, I wrote 5 grants, which was a lot. But I realized,
oh my gosh, you were working overtime, right?
yeah. So I did have a lot of help from my mentors writing the first grants, because I didn't know diddly squat really. So they helped me. The one that came through, I went down to New York. My buddy was turning 30, and this is pre-Uber. We were standing on the corner, Upper East Side, and wanted to get a cab, and it started to rain. So what happens when it rains in New York? Cabs are gone. It's like the lights turn on, the cockroaches went away. So there was a woman on the corner in front of us, and we said, hey, you're going downtown. Can we share the cab? We'll pay for it. Just let us sit in your cab. And she said, sure. And then we got to chatting, and she actually ran an HIV advocacy called Cable Positive that raised awareness of HIV funded through the cable TV industry, and they wanted to get into research a bit. So I didn't know any of this, but I told her all about what I was doing in the lab up in Boston, and we exchanged cards, and I got a $50,000 grant out of that cab ride, and then was able to renew it. So it was really a $100,000 cab ride, which was a lot of money back in the 1990s.
Dude, so here's the thing, you could look at that statistically and say, what are the odds, right? And then I think the way we would view it as that was preordained, that was something that must have had there's something in that.
I think so. I mean, I was really blessed. I really was.
Yeah, that there's some real power in that.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought of it that way. I always thought of it as lucky, but you're right. There's some, yeah,
Yeah, there's something at work there.
yeah. So she's a wonderful person. Molly Padian was really my first benefactor.
What a fantastic story. I mean, like,
It's really fun.
yeah, that is really cool. Right.
And I was just talking about research to everybody. You talk about flow, and I was really into what I was doing, and I could still have fun and go to New York and help my friend turn 30. But I was also really into what I was doing. I think if you look at a lot of successful people, they're really into what they're doing.
Passionate.
It's
not something that you just go, it's like, I don't know, for me, I'm not.
Tell me.
I'm not going to.
No, Jock, I want to hear it.
What I'm going to say is that, I don't think of myself as all that successful, but
I do.
Well, thank you. What I would say is that it never turns off. It never turns off. It's just something that it's just there all the time.
Well, I'm going to differ from you there. So I had, we're going to flash forward. We can go back to Boston because there's a lot more to talk about there.
Yeah, yeah.
But I want to talk a little about my later career. I guess I'm mid to late career at this point. And, there was a competition to see who was going to run our research institute when the founder retired. And I did not win that. And it was hard. Yeah, really hard. For me personally to get over it. And so I would say that I lost my passion for a while. I had a different perspective because I had this path that I thought I was on. And I would say it's just coming back. It's been a couple of years. It's been hard.
Now, hearing what you're saying, I would have to agree with you in the sense that we have some of these setbacks that can really derail us. And, it's kind of like the mystics didn't feel the presence of God for long periods of time, right?
Yeah.
These points in time when people are sort of like, hey man, this doesn't match the picture. I did all the work. Where's the outcome? Right?
Yeah. Poor Job.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We could just spend the entire afternoon talking about Job.
Yeah.
That's one to get into. Another podcast for that.
I like that.
Yeah.
Have me back.
Yeah. You know what? Here's the thing. I always ask the people that I really want to spend time with, I always come back. And you're certainly, every time I'm around you, Phillip, you just really are a guy that I just go, man, the energy of this guy. It's so like, you feel like anything great can happen.
I can't believe you're telling me that because I look at what you do. I don't know how many companies you run. I mean, they're all under an umbrella, but what you do, you have your finger in so many pies and not just work. I mean, you do the work on the boat, FDR's yacht. You do charity work. I just can't fathom how you do everything you do.
Well, it's funny. I think it's just, you get into like a flow state around, if I have to spend a lot of time sitting around not doing anything, I'm not.
Yeah, not good.
It's not good. Yeah.
I'm never bored.
Yeah. You know what? I think, what's so interesting is, you know so much. And I remember when we were in the pandemic, we're just getting information from you. I wasn't getting it directly. I was getting it through the rector of our church, but
right,
being advised about sort of what, and what the bishop was saying and what we could and could not do, which I personally at the time felt, and who's far be it for me to say, but I felt like it was a little heavy handed. But then again, we had a lot of old people and it was a pretty serious situation going on at that point in time.
Yeah. As we look through the retrospectoscope, clearly we should have been more open, especially for our kids. We can handle being isolated, but for the kids, it was a tough.
Yeah. Both of our kids were smack dab in the middle of that. That was, I mean, can you imagine like just going to school for, 8 hours a day or whatever it was in your room online?
Yeah, Britannia was going into her freshman year at Redwood, but she'd gone to Mill Valley Middle School, which was a different group of friends, right? So she was now at a high school where she knew nobody and couldn't meet them because it was all online. So, I mean, very isolating.
I remember when we had confirmation for both Brett and for Phoebe, out at Blackie's pasture.
Blackie's pasture, yep.
Right?
Yeah, the eco confirmation.
That was wild.
It was wild. Our eldest child, Cleo, went to school in Montreal. She went to McGill. She came home for Christmas, and she was in basically it was like a hotel room. It had its own bathroom in the room and a couple beds. She was in there alone. And she wasn't allowed to leave that room for 2 weeks because of the Montreal authorities. And if she walked out the door, they'd kick her out of the dorms.
Wow.
So it was like being in prison, really. 2 weeks stuck in a room. They'd bring food to her door, but that was it. So we would do Zoom calls every day with her to try to bear her through. But to do that to these kids is not
brutal.
Yeah. So clearly we made mistakes.
So now I know why she says the internship with us was so good.
She was out of prison.
It's like, man, this is great.
Yeah. That was she enjoyed you. That was her first data analytics experience.
Yeah.
So.
Everybody on the team's like, can we get her to come back? I'm like, no, she's never coming back here.
She's doing, so she's, as you know, at Georgia Tech doing her master's now. And I think this summer she has she's with a private equity firm doing AI, trying to apply AI in that private equity space, which I think is really challenging. So we'll see how far she gets.
That's going to be heavy duty equation work.
Yeah. Oh, that's what she does now. She has her math major and she's learning how to do the coding to be able to translate the algorithms into machine learning code. So
yeah,
she's well beyond where I am. That's for sure.
Yeah. It's so crazy to think, like, sometimes.
Isn't your son doing a similar thing? Yeah. Jack?
Yeah. He's, I think what we're going to see with this generation of kids is amazing. When we grew up, we just didn't have a lot of the things, the access to the information. I mean, it wasn't.
Encyclopedia Britannica. I remember that.
It literally read my mind. I remember we got the, yeah, right. Okay. I know how to break that. It's like, now you think about it, these kids have had access to information, and they access to information now with AI.
It's incredible.
I mean, how many times a day do you use Gemini, ChatGPT, Perplexity, whatever, to look up? I mean, I'm not using Claude really to look things up, but reality is, like, these models are so incredible. And if you know how to prompt them correctly, you can get information that's just insane.
Yeah, people complain about the hallucinations. I find that they're much less. And if you do your prompts right, I use ChatGPT mostly now just because that's what I have access to. And their links are in there. You can check, you have to double check the references, but it's so much better than I've been using it for 18 months and it's night and day. And this is the worst it's going to be. From here, it gets better.
I mean, it's insane how, funny story.
Yeah.
So Claude is now able to, it's capable of deception, and they ran some scenarios.
We're
going to shut it down. It's going to black.
Yeah, it's like, I'll shut myself down. Look over here.
Not happening, right? I had something with Grok where I was basically working on a project for like 4 hours on a Saturday.
Oh dear.
In voice mode. Yeah. It was really stupid on my part because I should have checked to make sure that it could capture this and put it into memory, but it could only operate in that session. And it was, I'm going to tell you, Grok 5, when it ships, is going to be insane. That is a great model, tied to XAI. It's phenomenal. I just think, like, I guess Elon's selling X to XAI now, which makes sense, right? And the notion that it's being fed continuously. One of the guys, now I'm drawing a blank on his name, I don't know why I could possibly do that, left Meta recently and really believes that large language models are not, AI is not going to be trained that way. It's going to come through having them watch video, and it's an incredible time.
It really is.
Yeah.
And you have to keep up because otherwise we're going to be the people writing on stone tablets when everybody else is on a computer.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like when we were in 1996 or 95 and we're sort of like, you've got mail, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we're about to break through on a whole nother level with agentic AI and automation.
Yeah.
That it's just going to be so phenomenal. And the interesting thing about it is you think about all of these companies need GPUs, but Google has really got I think Google has just got it nailed. Their entire AI supply chain is just, I mean, they've tensor processing units versus GPUs.
Yeah.
They've got it all the way down. And such a massive amount of search-related information, query-related information. It's really a phenomenal time. So from a medical standpoint, speaking of Harvard, they just came out with a new model to detect disease. And I mean, I think University of Toronto has something going on. I mean, there are just all these different models all over the world.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's
So UCSF, we're going to get access to ChatGPT in a closed environment in 2026.
oh, cool.
Everybody with a UCSF email will get that.
Wow.
Yeah. So the big thing, I'm at Vitalant, which is the second biggest blood bank in the U.S., and we collect almost 1 million units of blood a year, and we have a lot of data. All those people.
Yeah.
But of course, we can't just put that out on the web and throw it into ChatGPT or Claude or anything. So we need to have a closed system. So that's I think if you're a bank, if you're a hospital, whatever, you need to have an environment that's sort of a closed off environment. And then you can do retrieval augmented generation or RAG to interact with your data, but not have it leak out. So security is a big deal, as you can imagine. And we're moving slowly and cautiously. But again, we're working towards getting access to these large language models that can interact with our data. So right now, I get to use it. I can put things up there that are not sensitive, but you lose your intellectual property. There are all sorts of things you can do if you put the wrong stuff up there, or any personal information you certainly can't put up there.
Yeah. I mean, I was having a conversation with someone this morning. They're talking about the notion of, who will win the trust war? And she's like, oh, I don't think anybody, I mean, at this stage of the game, the notion of any kind of privacy or anything, like, so out the window, right?
It's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild.
Well, even with genetic sequencing, we would do genetic sequencing on research participants and say, this is all coded. You will never be linked to this. And then there was a pretty famous paper a few years ago where they took this data that had been uploaded and all anonymized, and they could actually go back and find people through their genetic code. They could figure it out. Our ability to protect privacy is getting less and less and less.
Yeah.
And of course, we carry around this little tracking beacon with us everywhere.
It's listening to everything you say.
It is. Even though I turn it off. Yeah, it's all there. It's all listening.
It's pretty wild.
Can we go back to Harvard?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So here I just finished this clinical bit, started in the lab, take a vacation whenever you want, right? So I was so focused, and this is terrible. When my first child was born, she was born at Mass General, Cleo, and Alex had a very long labor. Cleo was anteverted, meaning kind of sunny side up, which made it harder. And so the doctor said it's going to be about 12 hours. This is nowhere near ready, or 10 hours. And I said, okay, great. I had a lab in the next building over, so I went and ran an experiment all day and came back. And now looking at that with my 58-year-old self, like, Philip, what the hell? I was so focused on making it, right? So focused. And Alex was like, yeah, sure, honey, go do it. She was so supportive. And looking back, like, what the heck was I thinking? Of course, I was there for the key moments, but you get so wrapped up when you're young into getting ahead, I think, that you forget the perspective. You don't have the perspective yet.
Yeah.
Another time, now Cleo was probably, no, maybe it was Katie. I was in San Francisco at this point, and she was maybe 18 months. And it was one of my rare duties on night duty. I think Alex had been up several nights. And so she was crying. I went downstairs and looked her in the crib. And I said, what's wrong? She said, I want a hug. And I said, go back to sleep. Went back upstairs. And I told this to a colleague of mine. He looked at me like I had 3 hits and said, Philip, there are a finite number of hugs in this world. I said, okay, you're right. So I think you can get too intense, too focused. And a lot of people are like that. Well, I don't know if a lot are. I certainly was. And I'm becoming to appreciate it more now, how to have the balance.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think back on a lot of stuff where I can totally relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, missed opportunities, but that's part of life, right? And nobody's going to bat 1,000.
Yeah. So anyway, Harvard, grinding through, trying to write papers, and it was hard. It was really hard. And there was the guy who worked 16 hours a day was getting a little farther ahead. I worked 12. I said, okay, I'm going to get in at 7. Come on. I said I'd like to work later, and Alex said, dinner's going to be at 7. You can either make it or not. So I said, okay, I'll be home at 7. And then I could read in the evenings if I wanted. But anyway, I was trying to do 12 hours a day. I thought that would get me to where I wanted to go. And it did, although the people who worked harder, it's a very competitive environment there.
Whoa.
Very
Oh,
wonderful people, and not destructive competitive, but just
but no, they're
you can work. Yeah. All the overachievers. So I made it through, got some papers published, and it was near the end of my time there. I got to work with the Gates Foundation. One of the people had a big grant to introduce HIV drugs into Africa. And you probably remember
I do.
they had drugs in the US. So 96 was when these protease inhibitors came out. Now we're in like 2001, 2002, and we're still not, they're too expensive to give to the Africans. And they might not take them because they'd have resistance because their health systems weren't as robust as ours. A lot of excuses. And India began producing, Cipla began producing these things generically. And when the president of Nigeria, Obasanjo, Olusegun Obasanjo said, I'm going to buy 10,000, enough doses to treat 10,000 people for a year to begin HIV treatment. But the doctors hadn't been trained. So I was part of a team that got to go over there and help train doctors in Senegal and Nigeria to give these medicines. It was one of the most rewarding, I was in this lab, the Ivory Tower lab, and really trying to do good work on immunology of HIV. But then you get out into the real world and see the need and the huge impact you can have for relatively little money. So that's been a part of my work ever since, is going over to Africa to help with HIV diagnostics or therapy work and research. So that's really been a rewarding, it's not a big part of my job, maybe 10%, but whenever I get over there, I think, gosh, that's really an amazing place. And the people are amazing. So I feel fortunate to be able to interact at that level.
There's another thing that Gates Foundation was involved with in Africa was the river blindness, right? From mosquitoes.
It's actually a fly.
Is it a fly?
Yeah.
Don't ask me.
Yeah, well, it's actually a worm, Alcocerciasis, is the river blindness.
Okay.
And he's done a lot of good work on a ton, the foundation has done a lot of good work on a number of diseases that they pick out. They're still doing that.
Yeah.
He's trying to accelerate his giving out. I don't know if you've heard that. He's trying to step it up so it's all gone in 10 years.
Wild.
Yeah.
So you're in the Ivory Tower.
Yeah.
You go to Africa.
Yeah. And then I come back. So it's near the end of my time at Boston, right? And I had a monthly meeting with Bruce by this point. So I was a junior faculty. So it was, I was an instructor. So not on the professor, but almost professor. And so it was time for me to get a real job. And I went in for my monthly meeting with Bruce, and he said, well, so how many grants do you have? And I said, well, I've got a couple. Maybe I had 3 at that point, which was a lot for a young guy. How many papers? Didn't have many papers. I had 1 and a few more on the way. And he said, you should leave. And the mentor-mentee relationship is so powerful, especially in academia. He sort of controls the fate, and I almost started crying. I was, sort of shock. Yeah, shock. And he saw it. I kind of jumped. He said, no, this is not me wanting, you can stay as long as you want, but I see that the NIH funding is tightening up, which it has. The pay lines have come way down. He said, you may not get your R01 on the first try, and Harvard doesn't need another Bruce Walker. They've got me. You have this amazing skill set. Go out and see if you can get a startup package. He'd be fine if I stayed in the lab and kept publishing papers in his lab, but he was really a great mentor, looking out for me so that I could leave at the best time to get a good job. So Alex is from Toronto, my wife. And so we looked in Toronto and we looked in San Francisco for jobs. So it's basically Stanford, UCSF, and University of Toronto. And I called around. I immediately went to my network, and one of my friends is the Gladstone. The Gladstone's a great research institute here in San Francisco, affiliated with UCSF. I called up Doug Nixon and said, So, Doug, what do you think? Are there any jobs opening at the Gladstone? He said, we just filled 2 assistant professor positions, so there's no startup package, but you should call this guy Mike Bush. He has money in space. He's over at the blood bank. And I said, he does good work. I said, okay, well, I'll call Mike Bush. Cold called Mike, who's a professor, and said, Doug Nixon told me to give you a call. He said you had some startup money and some space, and I'm this guy from Harvard looking for a job. He said, no, we don't have any money, we don't have any space, but tell me a little about yourself. And I said, oh, no problem. I have 3 grants. I've got my own money. I just really need some space. He said, oh, really? Talked for 15 minutes and I drawn. He's such a great guy, and he's a really good friend. He just stepped down as the director of our institute, and he's still working. He's coming up. He lives in San Diego now, but still works for the institute. And he's been such a great mentor throughout my career, the last 20 years at the blood bank. And I feel so blessed to have had these amazing mentors along the way. I think as you talk to people on your podcast, I'm sure that you hear about mentorship.
It's like, it's one of the key things. I often ask people like, okay, well, how do you think that whole process works? And I think everybody has a different take. So I'd love to hear your take on how does one go about, I mean, a young person today, you're going to need that. And so oftentimes you don't know how to do it. So it's important to hear multiple takes on that.
As we're sitting here, I was just thinking, how did I end up with these great mentors? One is being receptive, right? So I've had mentees who just wanted to battle the whole way, and it was hard to help them. So I think being open and not having an authority or a chip on one shoulder is tough. A lot of people don't get along with their bosses. Those people I've noticed don't often go as far as fast. So being humble and receptive, I think if you're the young person, picking well when you go to your job, finding the right person, that's and it doesn't have to be the most successful person but really the personality that matches your mindset or what you want out of it. It may not even be personality, it may be a skill set that you want. But being thoughtful about picking positions, if you have that opportunity and that luxury, to pick the right mentors. And then the other thing, I had these main mentors who were my bosses, but I always sought out mentors outside of my organization. And having those outside advocates for me has been particularly powerful. And they have a perspective and also the ability to leverage other relationships that I may not have thought of.
Let's break the equation down though.
Yeah.
So you identify the person. That's number one, understanding. So, hey, this is someone that can help me achieve something that's important to me. There's the approach. So now you're sort of like making your case for, why take me under your wing.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the being willing to actually listen, because I don't think any mentor-mentee relationship is going to last very long if you ask a mentor to take you under their wing and then you take selectively permeable around
I like that.
The information they're sharing.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. 15 years ago, I was selected as sort of one of the young leaders in our blood bank. And so they said they were going to pair me with someone senior. We're headquartered in Scottsdale. So they were going to pair me with someone senior. I think the options were like CEO, CFO, head of HR, head of legal. And they paired me with the head of HR. I went, oh, geez, HR. They're always in the way, so there was a chance for me not to be very permeable, right? Because my interactions with HR was they're always making stupid rules, and I didn't get it. So this guy, Larry Reese, was head of HR, and we had a monthly call, and we'd spend an hour, and he would have me design the topics, and he would help, but I had to come to him with a topic. And I learned so much, and it's helped me so much. HR isn't just problems. They're actually, if you have a good, solid HR, it sets the tone for the whole company. And there is something to staying out of trouble. So there are some rules that have to be followed that are, they're laws. So knowing that is helpful, but also just how to interact with people. I really didn't have a lot of formal management training. It's just sort of you innately have it or you don't. That's a problem a lot of scientists have. You're a good scientist, you get promoted and you don't have the people skills. So I think how it works is you kind of get, it favors those who naturally have it. We don't have enough training, at least in my field, in that. So I was receptive to that mentor and got a whole lot more out of it than I expected. Even though my first knee-jerk reaction was this was not the mentor I would have picked. Turned out to be a great thing. So the next thing we're doing, our company has decided, we went through a really rough period. We were selling blood for less than it cost to make, and the company was losing money, and we were just sort of stringing along for years. The hospitals formed these group purchasing organizations, and it commoditized blood. So then the Red Cross is pitted against Vitalant, and we're both racing to the bottom and not covering costs, just trying to keep our market share. It was a real mess. That's finally working its way through. And prices are now coming up to the level where we're actually covering our costs. And now the company can breathe a little bit, and they're trying to develop the next generation of, management. So they've put a new coaching program in. And coaching, I don't know, what's coaching mean to you?
Gosh, I mean, I coached a lot of soccer.
Yeah. Okay. That was my first thought, right?
Yeah.
I love my high school water polo coach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? Water polo players are no joke. You don't want to you don't want to mess around with water polo players, man.
They're dirty and they're strong.
Oh man, I gotta tell you, and they can hold their breath.
Yes.
So yeah, you don't want to be at the bottom of the pool with one of those guys.
Yeah. Yeah. We used to, in high school, we had a game called Pinchy Pinchy. You basically would wrestle one-on-one, and whoever pinched said uncle, and then you'd let them up. But it was just full on, anything goes.
Yeah.
So what a great game. So there's that coaching, which is what I thought of. And then when I was with this HR person 15 years ago, coaching was really holding people's feet to the fire, trying to get underperformers to come up to snuff. And the new coaching that I'm learning is really, the coach does very little talking, kind of like you are here, and you just let the other person rattle on. But they're supposed to come to you with a problem or what they want to talk about, and the coach doesn't just reflect what they say, but helps direct how they think about their problems or their issues and break down internal barriers. So for this program, I have to do 60 hours of instruction and 100 hours of coaching to become this certified coach. And I'm really excited. So next week, I have my first part of my coaching as I get 3 hours of a real professional coach coaching me. And his specialty is the flow state. Isn't that apropos? Now, I'll have to come back to the podcast after I've done a few sessions.
I know. I can't wait. I'm so excited.
Exactly.
This is so
He's doing
awesome.
the transforming. But already I've done a few sessions where we practice on each other, all the people in this program, and it's changed how I do things. It's really revitalized my energy. And so I need to write grants. That was my problem. I get so bogged down. I'm a vice president of this company. I'm a doctor. I've staff I supervise. Wasn't doing my job of writing grants, or one of my jobs, which is really important, probably the most important, to raise the money. So, and I tended to do my workflow of stuff would come in, I'd bang it out, but I wasn't having my blocks of time anymore. I used to work from home on Wednesdays, still do. But before Zoom, I would actually have a day where I could focus and get into my flow state. So now what I'm trying to do is, as I read my emails, I just put them aside in an archive box and do them at the end of the night after dinner. So things that are sort of not high brain power, I'm pushing to later in the day to allow myself room for the flow state, because I'd lost my flow state, lost it.
It's so great to hear you talk about that and time management and the way that, you're managing your time, because I always say, there's different shifts of my job in these different roles, and I've got to actually partition time. So a lot of times, it's 8:00 at night. I'm going through emails because that's, I always say to certain people, I'm like, hey, if you want to don't email me. That's if it's anything that's urgent, that's not where you're going to get me. You text me. So the coaching side of it, it's sort of like your first phase of it. It's like, you got to decide if you're going to be a Bobby Knight or a John Wooden, right? And holding your feet to the fire, right?
Yeah.
Like the Bobby Knights are the guys screaming at you. Nobody likes those
Nobody's
coaches, right?
Yeah.
Those coaches suck.
Yeah.
And I found myself in coaching being one of those guys at times.
Yeah. Well, it's hard when you're competitive.
Yeah. And then the other side of it is just really coming to this realization that it is really heavy on the reward side. And the creativity around reframing, not pointing out failure, pointing failure out really reinforces failure. It gets you to
Yeah.
focus on it. So getting people to like reframing it and like, oh man, it's interesting how I think if you maybe cross the ball a little bit, maybe that seemed like you got a little deep in there. And I wonder what it would be like asking questions, right?
Asking questions.
Wonder what it would be like if you crossed the ball earlier and then letting them come back. And so it's a collaboration.
Yep.
Um,
Rather than top down.
yeah, I mean, like, there's a time for top down too. Sure, you got to take an order, but
Yeah.
it is what it is. But yeah, it's really interesting. So that's super exciting for you.
It's fun. It's a new chapter. It's almost like being in therapy.
Yeah.
Not that I've really done therapy, but it's good. It's good to introspect. And a lot of the coaches will start off with a little mindfulness exercise to get the body centered and able to leave the last meeting behind.
So is this like some sort of meditation with box breathing or something like that? You're doing some.
Yeah, you feel your feet grounded on the floor and you take some big breaths, and it's just 1 to 2 minutes just to get, you have an hour session just to get things on a plane where you can communicate and leave all the stress behind and then really introspect.
I wonder, I'm curious what your thoughts are. I wonder if people actually had a discipline around that throughout the day. Almost like the notion of standing up and doing 10 squats an hour, right?
Yeah.
Just body weight squats per hour. Now is like they're saying that that's the equivalent of walking the 10,000 steps.
Oh, interesting.
Or some variation of that. Don't hold me to the actual math
Okay.
arithmetic on it. But I wonder if people actually put that into practice where they actually just took that time and sort of like said, okay, I'm going to take my break now, reset my CNS and get into, how much better they would perform.
Yeah, I think clearing the brain a little between, I have meeting as during the day. I'm sure you can relate. So a little brain clearing would refocus. And I find that just with these, I've only done a few of these coaching sessions, just being able to listen and be more present in my listening when I'm interacting with my employees or peers, because I get so distracted if I'm on a conference call. So my definition of a boring conference call is when I'm not talking, right? So if I'm just kind of a passenger on the call, and this happens to all of us, I have another screen going with the news or whatever, trying to do another email or whatever it is. And I'm trying to calm it down and be a little more present and see how that works. I don't know if it's going to work or not.
Yeah, it will be really interesting to hear what your experience is like.
And the other thing is, I get older, I find that I do get tired, like after dinner. I can't do the creative work I used to. I used to be able to just go right back at it and be full on at 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. That was pretty good hours because I didn't have any meetings.
Yeah.
And now I realize I'm just tired. And I was doing something like drinking an extra glass of wine at dinner so I didn't have to work something because I was just so tired. So now giving myself permission and giving these tasks that are, reading a journal or writing a letter of recommendation or all these little things I have to do, doing that during that sort of twilight period of the day, I think is going to help me a lot.
Well, and I think, what's interesting about you is like, you are a guy that, oftentimes like, we'll be at breakfast, like, I got to go because I got to go play tennis. Or I'm riding my bike. I'm like, hey, Phil, it's like storming outside. It's crazy. And now I'm riding my bike to work. Like, look, okay. You're a guy that's really in shape. You really take care of yourself. You've got, I think you have just a super life balance and you're a great role model for so many people. It'll be really interesting to hear what that next level brings for you.
Mm-hmm.
So a quick question for you. We had COVID and, there's always that thing I think in everyone's back of everyone's mind that's made them very uneasy. In our businesses, we see it with our clients where they're just uneasy about what's next. There's always in the back of the mind, could there be another pandemic? We want to like lull ourselves into the thought process that these super bugs or these things. The long story short is there in your mind, like there's some people who are just like, oh, it's just a matter of time before we're there. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. It is a matter of time. Now, how much time, nobody knows, right? So that's the thing. So our last big pandemic, I guess, was the 1918 flu. And then almost 100 years to the year, well, it was 2019. So we were 101 years. Boom, we had another huge worldwide pandemic. In between, there have been diseases that, the WHO definition of pandemic, I think the H1N2 flu qualified as pandemic, but it was really just the flu and it just spread all over the place. So we're going to have diseases that spread all over the place. But what about a disease with higher mortality? And I would say at some level, we dodged a bullet. So I was lucky enough to work on the SARS-1 outbreak. So in that outbreak, that was in 2003, there was a physician from Guangzhou, China, came down to Hong Kong and rode an elevator with this elderly couple. Their son had won a night at the Hotel Metropole, or a stay at the Hotel Metropole. So his parents came from Toronto, rode the elevator with that physician from China, got infected with SARS-1, which is SARS-CoV at that point, or SARS, and then went back to Toronto and spread it within Toronto. And that outbreak, half the people infected were healthcare workers. It didn't transmit person to person as well, but it was much higher mortality than SARS-CoV-2. SARS-CoV-2 was sort of a 1% to 2% mortality. That was closer to 10%, really bad. And some, like some ethnic groups, the Filipinos, did very badly, and a lot of the nurses were Filipino. So the doctors up in Canada said, we need help. So they asked the U.S. physicians, infectious disease physicians, to volunteer. About half of the U.S. ID docs volunteered. And I was lucky enough to be chosen. So I got to work at one of the hospitals, North York General, in Toronto, really at the end of the outbreak. So we had this 800-bed hospital with 8 patients recovering from SARS and 8 recovering from something else, but we couldn't do any transfers because we were spreading SARS from hospital to hospital. And it brought a whole health system to its knees. It was unbelievable how that worked. So when we saw SARS-CoV-2 come out, that's why there were a lot of the gloving, we're supposed to wear gloves. It was all contact. That virus didn't get very high levels that spread person to person by air, whereas SARS-CoV-2 did, the second coming. But the good news, it was much more transmissible. So obviously killed a lot more people because it infected a lot more people, but the per person mortality was much lower. What if it had combined the transmissibility of SARS-CoV-2 with the lethality of SARS-1? That would be a disaster. So we had a warm-up, but it could be worse. I don't want to raise anxiety, but that is, there's influenza. H5N1 is one of the flus, and it seems to be getting less pathogenic, but in the beginning, it was killing half the people it infected. Again, very hard to transmit person to person. Because of where the receptors are for that virus. They're deep in the lungs. You get the virus way down there. Yeah, exactly. So it's very rare for person to bird. It's very rare for even bird to person transmission. And it's bad luck. But so there's the potential out there that you get a virus. Usually it's a virus that's going to do this because it spreads so quickly. That is highly transmissible and highly lethal. That could happen. We think that the SARS-CoV-2 is disrupted. That would be really something. If you're having, 10% of the population dying, that would be disastrous.
And now, I think there's this apprehension towards, you mentioned vaccinations, right?
Yeah.
There's this apprehension towards vaccinations, and people may be sort of like, hey, I'm not going that route when something, we certainly fast-tracked the COVID vaccine.
Yeah.
And there may be some not so great things that came from that. There's lots of talks about seeing more clots now than I've ever seen before, and a number of other things. I guess the spike proteins wreak havoc in lots of different ways. What are your thoughts about that in terms of,
Yeah, really good question. So in my world, in the blood banking world, there are pushes in some states to have a blood supply of people who've never been vaccinated. There aren't many of those people, so that would be a really hard thing logistically to do. So we've looked.
That's really interesting, right? You want that 2019 pre-vaccination blood.
Well, you want somebody who never got a vaccine to donate blood and have a separate blood bank. So is that justified by the science? So we did some studies collaborating with a physician Narad Rubinian, who's from Tiburon here. And he's at Kaiser. So he has big data from Kaiser. And we know which donors from Vitalant we gave to these Kaiser patients. And we know were these donors infected or vaccinated or both. And so with big numbers of patients in a healthcare system like that, we can look and say, if you got a transfusion from someone who had been vaccinated, did you do worse than if you got a transfusion from someone who hadn't been vaccinated? And what we found was there's no difference. So there's no health signal there that it's bad to get blood from somebody who's been vaccinated. What we did find is very interesting. If the person had been recently infected, not recently vaccinated, but recently infected, their platelets, which are little blood clotting cells, are more effective because when you get infected and you have COVID, your immune system gets ramped up and your platelet numbers go up and they're activated. So when they get into the patient, that patient is less likely to require a red cell transfusion and their platelets go up a little more with that recently infected blood. But that the vaccine itself was safe. Another thing we looked at is there are autoantibodies that happen after you get infected with SARS, and autoantibodies are antibodies directed against our own proteins. So in collaboration with the Chan Zuckerberg Biohub investigators, we looked at autoantibodies in people who we had a sample before they got infected or vaccinated, and then they either got infected or they got vaccinated, then infected. So if you get SARS-CoV-2, you develop a bunch of autoantibodies. We know this. If you get vaccinated, you develop very few autoantibodies, just a couple of those that the SARS-infected people do. Then if you go on to get infected, you don't make the autoantibodies. So the vaccine protects against that. So all the safety signals look like the vaccine is safe from what we've done. Now, there are some studies. They did autopsy studies of people who had died, and they'd had the mRNA vaccine, and some of them had had a heart attack before they got vaccinated. And that mRNA vaccine looks like it got taken up by the immune cells in the heart, in the damaged heart tissue, so they could actually find vaccine there. They've also done studies of people with strokes and found that the mRNA vaccine was in the blood vessels where the stroke was. So it looks like those little nanoparticles will home to tissue that is damaged or inflamed.
This is why you see myocarditis happening with.
Well, that's also very interesting. So young men in particular, you give them the vaccine and a certain percentage are going to get inflammation around the heart. What is interesting, though, is that if after the mRNA vaccine, you can get that myocarditis, but it's tenfold less than if they got infected. So those kids, if they get COVID, they have 10 times the chance of getting the myocarditis. So they're still better off getting vaccinated and not getting infected. So now we're at the current day, and should everybody get the vaccine? And the other thing that important data point is, when nobody had an immunity, it saved lives like nobody's business. Because if you got SARS-CoV-2 and didn't have any immunity to it, much worse outcomes, no matter what your age. Now, if you're our age, you're less likely to die anyway, but still there's excess mortality if you hadn't been vaccinated. You get sicker and more likely to die. And remember, all the ventilators were full, the morgues were full. It was a disaster. So now everybody's been vaccinated or vaccinated and infected. I'm sure we all have been. What does the vaccine do now? So the vaccine now, you get a booster. It boosts the antibody level for about 4 to 6 months. And then it's like you didn't have the boost. You're back down to where you are today. So then it's an individual choice. So for myself, I don't take the vaccine anymore because it makes me sick for a day. And I just rather risk it. I'm not going to get sick, 3 days a year to prevent one COVID every couple of years. So that's my choice. Now my 87-year-old mother has no side effects from the vaccine and she's older, so she does take it. And I think that is kind of the right way to think about it. It's your own risk benefit of how the vaccine interacts with you.
Yeah, it's sort of so complex.
It's really complex, and they're new vaccines. We don't completely understand how they work, their distribution, and we're very interested in looking at that in my lab as well.
Yeah. All right. So, pathway to peak performance. You said earlier that you have not reached your goal.
Yes. Wanted to cure a disease. That was my stated goal.
So what do you think?
We have one project in the lab. We're working on an anti-cancer antibody. So it targets the immune system. And it works in mice. And so I need to raise enough money to be able to take that through to a monoclonal antibody, which is a drug that can be patented. So we have a process now, need to get it to the drug stage where it can be patented and then developed. You give that to a drug company and they'll take it. So one of the things I'm working on in my coaching is how do I do that? It was really fascinating. I was talking to my coach and I said, I need to raise money for the lab and I'm doing that first and then I'll work on the anti-cancer antibody. She said, wait a minute. Why can't you do both in parallel? Okay. So I need to sort of restructure my time so I make time for the grant writing and make time for the immune therapy project.
That particular piece that you're working on
Yeah.
is a huge.
The impact would be huge for humanity and who cares about me? It's the people who need the therapy.
Yeah, I mean, you get to be an instrument of good in a way that is so powerful. And as you said, you saw it when your rotation through on oncology, like what that is for like people, and gosh, that is oof.
I like the way you're thinking. So Vitalant, where I work, is a nonprofit. It's a nonprofit blood bank, and we have a foundation, the Vitalant Foundation, 501(c)(3), or C3, I can never remember. Anyway, so I think, you can raise money with the podcast, but anybody listening, I want them to donate to the Vitalant Foundation so that we can cure cancer.
Yeah.
I like that.
I mean, I just think that is so great. And I really believe in you.
Oh, thank you.
I really just have great faith in you as a person. You're just really a great example of somebody who's really just put their mind to something. You persisted through difficult times. You never gave up. You always have a great attitude. Now, I'm not living with you, right? So
we don't have to bring Alex on the show.
Yeah, I do know your wife.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and she is phenomenal.
She is.
Yeah, I think we both married up, right?
Oh, we certainly did. We're punching above our weight.
Yeah, exactly. The long story short is, man, it's just been such a pleasure to spend this time with you, and I'm so excited about where you're headed and what you're doing. Thank you for all the contributions that you've made, and I can't wait to have you back. I want to hear about this coaching. And I think that in the pathway to peak performance, right? We all need coaches. We all need mentors. We all need to find out what it is that we want to do. How we get there is the mystery. But along the way, the right person can say that one thing to you that can just shift it in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
So that'll be super exciting to see what happens.
Yeah. Jock, I'm so humbled you had me on here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm humbled. Are you kidding me? Great to see you, my friend.
That was great. Thank you.
Hey, thanks everyone for watching the show. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us out here at the channel, and share the video with someone who might be interested in supporting the charity that our guest mentioned in the episode. Thanks again. We'll see you soon.